revisit the content yourself and share it with your colleagues, but we will let you know as soon as this is ready and good to go. So we also invite your comments and questions. Please take a minute to familiarize yourself with the interface. Please look at the Q&A chat box, not the chat, the Q&A on your screen. If you think of a question for the speakers at any point, just type it in there and I will either pose it to the speakers at the time or hold it for the discussion portion at the end of the event. Perhaps we'll go for the latter. I will set the questions after all speakers have completed their talks. If your question or comment is addressed to a particular speaker, please make sure to mention it. So you let us know to whom the question is addressed. Again, not the chat box, but the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. In case you'd like to speak instead of write, please look at the participants chat box at the bottom of your screen. And if you click there and you look at the bottom right-hand corner, you can actually raise your hand. So I will see it and I will make sure and I will facilitate that you actually are able to pose a question verbally. I hope this is clear. In case you have questions, you can send them to me directly through the chat box at the bottom of your screen. So there's 3 things you need to keep in mind: raising your hand, which you can do, send me a question, which you again can do, or send me a direct message through the chat box if you'd like. I'm not going to take up any more of your time with housekeeping. At this time, I'm going to hand the floor over to our first speaker, Maria Spiliotopoulou. She's a researcher, she's a historian at the Modern Greek History Research Center in the Academy of Athens. She's also the national coordinator for Daria Greece. Welcome, Maria, and please, we're looking forward to your talk with the title Digital History Portals, a tool for modern Greek history. Thanks, Maria.
Thank you, Ayati. I will share my screen, hopefully. Okay. Okay. So I would like to thank the organizers of the present event for the invitation and the opportunity to participate in the present panel. And I'm sure our discussion will be of a general interest, not only of interest to digitally minded archivists and researchers. Okay, it doesn't go. I will try it again. Okay, so here. Okay. To articulate what is past does not mean to recognize how it really was. It means to take control of a memory as it flashes in a moment of danger. And that applies especially to the Greek 1940s, to the war against the Italians and the Germans in the mainland and in Crete, against fascism and Nazism, also to the occupation of the country by the Axis that followed, the development of the resistance movement, one of the most important and massive in occupied Europe, to the activity of the Greek government in exile and of the Greek forces, mainly in the Middle East and in Italy, by the side of the Allies, to the liberation of the country, the interim year of 1945, to the Civil War and its legacy. So, keeping that in mind and to discuss the user's needs when assessing archival sources of the 40s, particularly digital sources, I will briefly refer to the contribution of the Academy of Athens in the interdisciplinary venture of the development of the Metadata Repository in the context of the APOLLONIS infrastructure, what is ultimately to be used as a digital history portal or platform, a tool for modern Greek history. Aiming to respond to the user's needs, our team of historians, in close collaboration with the team of the Digital Curation Unit of the Research Center Athena, and that of the Institute of Communication and Computer Systems of the National Technical University of Athens, selected Greek archival collections that are most suitable and already digitally curated to various degrees to integrate them in the repository. We also developed scenarios of research that could describe the way researchers and educators proceed to study specific subjects of the 40s historical events to give examples of the needs of the future users of the portal. The users being of different levels, academics specialized in history, university students, teachers in secondary, hopefully also primary education, as also pupils and the wider public interested in the decade. The content of the repository depends on the availability of the archival, academic, and research institutions. The latter also have archives departments. So we propose to collaborate with archives that have already digitally curated collections based on their own infrastructure, as they have been already mapped within the project of DARIA-GR. In the same context, but also in the wider context of the historians community, together with Athena and the Institute of Communication and Computer Systems, at first we contacted the Contemporary Social History Archives, ASCII, and the History Directorate of the Hellenic Army General Staff, institutions which have already collaborated with Europeana and whose digitized collections form the main core of the 1940s portal, but are also among the fundamental archival collections of the Greek 1940s in every aspect, offering different insights in significant events of the period. These institutions possess collections of vast number of documents of various kinds and forms. Their commitment towards open archival research made our cooperation possible and fruitful, as also of all the institutions that are part of the infrastructure that Maria Elvanidou will present. Stathis Pavlopoulos will elaborate on a specific collection of ASCII. We could also later on discuss some of the other collections of ASCII. So here is a map of the History Directorate regarding the Greek offensive operations against the Italian forces in southern Albania in the first months of the war in 1940. I wish to briefly refer to the collections of the History Directorate of the Hellenic Army, which cover, among others, in detail, the military aspects of the war against the Axis in various fronts, include personal records of the fighting men, official aspects of the activity of the resistance organizations in occupied Greece, the day-to-day developments during the civil war, not only on the part of the Hellenic Army, but also through captured documents of the Democratic Army of Greece, these being the two fighting sides then. So here we have a map of the array of the opposing troops in August 1948 in northwestern Greece during the Civil War. The spatial aspect of the collection is also important. To note that the Directorate collections are already very popular among the wider public, as also the academics, family historians and others, the same applying to the collections of ASCII, especially so to the Macronissos Digital Museum. The Academy of Athens' contribution to the repository is not a proper archival one. It is a digital collection calendar of events 1940-1944, a database covering the period from the first day of the Italian attack on Greece to the liberation of Athens and the arrival of the Greek government of national unity in the capital, based on the documents of the archival series of the British Foreign Office 371. The calendar unfolds day by day the most significant events as recorded in the archives of the Foreign Office, among others the policy of the Greek government in Greece and in exile, the organization and the activities of the resistance groups and of the Greek armed forces in the Middle East, the policy of Britain and the other allies, as also the policy of the occupying forces and of the Quisling government, the extensive reprisals against the population, and the everyday life in occupied Greece, famine, and other difficult situations. It has been already published in 2 volumes and is accompanied by additional tools, keywords, and thesaurus, enabling multiple searches and data exports to answer different users' queries. The same applies to the other collections of the repository in varying degrees according to their own methodology. The scenarios we developed in the Academy of Athens, as for example, how a secondary education teacher could use the portal to gather material for his or her pupils in order to assign them a project as to how a specific region near the border with Albania experienced the war against Italy, or how a modern Greek history researcher would proceed to study social, political, and ideological conflicts taking place in a specific or in various regions in southern Greece during the transitional period of liberation and civil conflict in the summer and autumn of 1944, indicated how researchers, as also all users of the portal, need to be able to access the archival material in a structured, chronological, and geographical context, need to search specific individuals, organizations, and institutions, and also need to be able to search the documents based on their thematic contents. The 1940s repository is a work in progress, and we hope that in the near future, the APOLLONIS teams will be able to include metadata of digitized newspapers collections, video and sound archives, bibliographical records, hospital and hospice records, and other collections of Greek archives to widen the scope of research. Can the digital future, or even the digital present in some cases, be our home? And what if users are unfamiliar with the methods and tools available? Many of us have already experimented with platforms such as Europeana, and on local level, for example, with digitized newspapers, to mention one of the oldest available platforms of the National Library of Greece. The platform created, however, in the context of APOLLONIS, may require a higher level of digital literacy and reveal the gap between digital natives and users who grew up in an analog age, the latter constituting at present an important number or even the majority among senior researchers. Inequalities will always exist, and platforms might eventually be used in a different way according to one's digital literacy. So different levels of information might be accessed. But even on the lowest level of digital literacy, the repository would play an important part in the way the history of the Greek 1940s is perceived and researched, and the way their collective memory is shaped again and again. There exists no definite approach to the period. Many issues are still open to interpretation. New data keep coming into light, such as oral narratives or long-forgotten family archives. And at the time of fake news, conspiracy theories and hate speech in the wider web, to render prestigious archives containing data representative of every spectrum more accessible and visible is a big step towards overcoming stereotypes and historical revisionism and acknowledging the legacies of the 40s. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Maria. I particularly like the way you concluded. Again, let me remind you, if you have any comments or questions, those of you following us, you can post them on the Q&A button by pressing the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. So I will swiftly move on to our next speaker, Stathis Pavlopoulos. He is a historian from the Contemporary Social History Archives. Maria mentioned them just before. We call them ASCII in Greek. And he's going to be talking to us about a very interesting project, the Macronissos Digital Museum, a digital insight of the traumatic legacies of the Greek Civil War. Stathis, the floor is yours now.
Thank you, Ayati. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm very glad to be here with you, and I would like to thank you for the invitation to present from ASCII's point of view our contribution to the digital 40s. I shall start with my speech. Since 2004, and due to the digitization programs funded by Greece and the European Union funds, such as the program Society of Information, the Contemporary Social History Archives, ASCII, together with other archival and scientific institutions as the Academy of Athens, Benaki Museum, and other institutions, entered the digital world. By participating in such projects, ASCII aimed to spread an unknown archival material regarding the Greek 40s in a broader public, as well as to preserve this fragile material by digitizing it. Moreover, these projects led to the development of ASCII's skills in the digital environment. ASCII was one of the first archival institutions in Greece whose main interest in the 1940s and the collective memories of this turbulent decade. Beginning with baby steps and continuing more confidently, the institution reached to a point of preserving in its digital repositories more than 250,000 digital items accessible to the public. Specifically, I shall refer to the fully digitized archive of the United Pan-Hellenic Youth Organization called EPON, a massive resistance organization formed as the youth branch of the National Liberation Front, EAM. EPON was founded in February 1943 and counted more than 60,000 members, becoming the biggest resistant youth organization across Europe during the 40s. Additionally, I have to mention the unique collection of underground and illegal press of the 40s and 50s that is also accessible in ASCII's digital collections. The Digital Museum of Macronissos, which is the subject of my speech, attempted to upgrade the digital projects of the institution and served as a turning point, a milestone, I should add, in the field of public history programs. Even though it was designed as a low-cost project using open access tools like WordPress platform, the Digital Museum of Macronissos was a result of careful and methodic design and implementation with an immediate impact. As a matter of fact, during the first week of the platform launch, more than 10,000 unique visitors browsed the museum. Beginning with some introductory points, Macronissos is a small island situated in the east coast of Attica and is a fully deserted, isolated, and rocky place. I can share with you some map. You can see the exact position of Macronissos here. Keeping in mind this main feature of the island, we can easily understand why Macronissos over the centuries operated as a place for displacement and quarantine. Sometimes for actual diseases like plague, as in the 1910s and 20s, more recently in the 40s and 50s for the cure of social diseases, such as communism. Between 1912 and 1913, thousands of Turkish prisoners of the First Balkan War were transferred and situated to the island. A decade later, on June 1922, Macronissos Island served as a temporary settlement for the refugees from Pontus and the Black Sea who had just begun to arrive in Greece. With the arrival of more than 8,000 refugees in a single day, many of them who were sick or suspected for cholera cases, the Agios Georgios infirmary at Salamina Island was deemed inadequate and dangerously close to Athens, so Macronissos appeared as the ideally remote and safe for the Greek people place. During the Greek Civil War, the case was quite different, and Greece had already faced a turbulent and traumatic period, but the main objective of the Greek state, the protection of the population by the diseases, was the same and even stronger. At that point, when the political conflict was escalated to an open war between the Greek National Army and the Democratic Army of Greece, WWII, the military branch of the Greek Communist Party, the crucial action to be taken was the constraint of the contagious disease, the constraint of communism. Once more, Macronissos served as an ideal solution to the problem and was transformed to an organized experiment of rehabilitation. As we can easily suppose, action had to be especially taken in neuralgic sectors of the state, like army. Therefore, in 1946, the military camps of Macronissos were established by the National Army to cleanse suspect soldiers and officers from the ranks, thus to safeguard the combat readiness of the troops deployed against the Democratic Army of Greece. Based on information provided by the local police authorities, the Greek army deemed anyone on the left political spectrum, especially those who had participated in the National Liberation Front, EAM, between 1941 and 1944. Those suspects from the summer of 1946 were assigned to special battalions. When the battalions were formed, their transfer to Macronissos Island was ready to begin. The first battalion of suspected soldiers arrived at Macronissos on May 28, 1947, followed by 2 more battalions over the next months. From spring 1949 and on, suspected civilians were forced to displacement at Macronissos, a development indicative of the intensity and the extent of the violence. Macronissos Island was already a symbol of torture and humiliation, a place of violation of human rights, an island of pain and death. Designing the Digital Museum of Macronissos a few years ago, the basic challenge was the above mentioned. How could we open a public discourse on a subject that involves a great amount of human sorrow with sensitivity and respect to the victims? How to deal with the controversial and traumatic past of the Greek Civil War and the exiles, issues that dominated the Greek contemporary history and caused extended social and political conflicts? Finally, how to open such a topic in a broader public, and especially in the digital environment where polarization and extreme opposition easily emerges. At this point, I shall agree with Maria Spiliotopoulou on conspiracy theories and all this public discourse in the social media. The task was quite complex and included a lot of contradictions from the very first moment. Therefore, the project team had to place some key objectives of the museum, of the digital museum. Listing these objectives, firstly, I would mention that Macronissos Digital Museum stands not as a history court. Its aim is to motivate a structured and rational discussion on a rather traumatic past, but in a non-emotional way. Neither victimization nor heroization are included in the purposes of the museum. People and actions are examined as social phenomena of their era and the specific historical circumstances of the Greek Civil War in a way that anachronisms and obvious explanations are avoided. For this purpose, the archival material that is digitized and presented in the museum covers a large variety of subjects and attempts to bring in the discussion different perspectives. As a public history project that is addressed not only to historians and researchers, but also to a broader public, the museum is trying to shed light on the whole phenomenon of Macronissos. Thus, it provides different kinds of resources suitable for scholars as well as non-specialists. More than 1,000 digital items, such as photographs, documents, journals, maps, topographical plans and drawings, books, and testimonies, are fully accessible to the user. Additionally, research tools such as indexes and glossaries are available for facilitating the user's browsing. All the digital items are characterized and described by metadata entries following the Greek VPAP model and the ISAD guidelines. Moreover, each item is accompanied by thematic tags and categories that can relate it to similar material, broadening in this way the user searches. As mentioned before, the museum tries to give broad and not individual insights of the subject. For instance, a significant number of photographs is indicative of the everyday life conditions, the daily tasks and activities, such as cooking and cleaning, the tough weather conditions, and the hostile landscape. Finally, it represents the personal strategies for cohabitation and coexistence. You can see some of the photographs here of everyday life activities. In this perspective, Macronissos is considered as a complex phenomenon, as an experiment of constant psychological and physical violence, aiming to bend resistant attempts and shatter the opposite political opinion and beliefs. Beliefs that, according to the official state ideology and the military authorities of the era, had to be transformed and cured. This process is clearly reflected on the declarations of repentance that are presented in the museum, written by rehabilitated soldiers and civilians. These declarations, except for their public announcement in Macronissos camp, they were published in the daily press and especially in local newspapers. Sometimes they were publicly read in churches after the Sunday liturgy. The purpose was clear. The treatment of the diseased communist soldier had to be primarily announced to his parents, family, and village. That humiliating process is just an example of the psychological violence and torturing methods that were used against suspected soldiers. The presentation of this material in the digital museum was a quite complicated task in terms of personal data protection. Therefore, all the names and personal data that are included in the declarations of repentance are covered with white strips so that all the sensitive information is protected and fully respected. In this way, the user is able to see the form and the content of the document and collect the necessary historical information, but is not aware of the person that signs the declaration. The propaganda methods in Macronissos were various and can be found in many exhibits of the digital museum. Dynamic images, symbols of power and physical strength can be found everywhere. Photographs from soldiers' gymnastic activities aim to show the masculinity of the Greek army, contrary to the weakness of communism.
Stathis, two more minutes. I hate to say.
Okay. Moreover, the ideological indoctrination can be detected in propagandistic publications such as the magazine Skapanevs, it means shaper, that is partly digitized and uploaded on the digital museum. Similar are the records regarding the censorship methods. On the other hand, the museum includes a variety of resources portraying the wide reaction, both in the Greek and international public sphere, against Macronissos camp and the excessive violence. Beginning by Rizzospastis and Mahi newspaper articles, the Macronissos case traveled across Europe and sparked notable solidarity initiatives. Committees such as the British League for Democracy in Greece mounted active campaigns to abolish Macronissos and draw attention to rights violation and the lack of freedoms in Greece. This activity peaked in the early 50s with the publication of several magazine articles by likes of Jean-Paul Sartre in the journal L'État moderne. The collective memory of Macronissos, what we could call the Macronissos after Macronissos, is also an issue that concerns the concept of the museum. Thus, relevant material is collected and presented in the museum. Photographs, testimonies of ex-detainees and exiles, artworks inspired by Macronissos have taken their place in the museum. At this point, I have to underline that the digital museum would have been poor without the inclusion of the photographic archive of Nikos Margaris. Nikos Margaris, displaced in Macronissos himself, was one of the first persons that dealt with the memory of Macronissos Island. Margaris wrote a 2-volume history of Macronissos that was published in 1966, a bold act at a time of great political turbulence when the state viewed communism and communists as its #1 enemy. 1 year before, 1965, Margaris revisited the island for the first time in order to take pictures to document the condition of the buildings and other facilities.
Stathis, I'm afraid your time, you should really wrap up. The time is up.
Yes, I need 1 more minute.
Okay.
Margaris' example was also followed by other former detainees and memory associations. Reaching my conclusion by these thoughts, I'm not implying that everything in the digital museum was perfectly designed and done. On the contrary, certain parts of the museum can be upgraded and tasks that had started and left uncompleted have to be finished. For instance, a fully documented register of all the soldiers and exiles that were displaced in Macronissos. Additionally, more relevant archives and collections have to be digitized and uploaded so that the museum keeps presenting new and enriched content. Even though, in my point of view, projects like the Macronissos Museum should be continuous and open. The experience of 3.5 years of the museum operation confirms such a statement. Since the launch of the platform, many people, children, and grandchildren of Macronissos displaced soldiers communicated with our institution and eagerly donated bigger or smaller collections, letters and photographs of their ancestors from the dark ages of Macronissos. Priceless souvenirs representing their family stories crossed with other people's stories, becoming altogether pieces of the digital puzzle of Macronissos. The motivation of this community and their active support to the project constitutes the bigger success story of the Macronissos Digital Museum. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stathis, and thanks for keeping to the time. So the floor is on to the next speaker, my colleague from the Digital Curation Unit, Athena Research Center, and also a researcher here at where we're located physically right now at the Athens University of Economics and Business. Maria is about to talk to you about all the work that has been carried out within the context of APOLLONIS. And the title of her talk is From Archives to Digital Research Infrastructures Towards a Thematic Micro-Infrastructure for the Study of Greece in the 1940s. On you go, Maria.
Thanks, Ayati, and thanks all for being here today. Let me share my screen and my presentation. Okay, so for the next 15 minutes, I will try to show you what we've been doing to facilitate archival research for the study of the 1940s in Greece. So let's dive a bit to the title, in the title of my presentation, From Archives to Digital Research Infrastructures. So which infrastructures we're talking about? APOLLONIS is the Greek infrastructure for digital arts, humanities, and language research and innovation. It is essentially an umbrella for both Clarin and Daria infrastructures in Greece. For those of you not familiar with these two, you should definitely check them. Part of our job in APOLLONIS is to identify and support humanities researchers' needs in the digital world, and accessing remote data sets from archives is definitely one of them. So why a micro-infrastructure? What we mean by it? Well, think of it as a Russian doll, a smaller scale thematic infrastructure built within APOLLONIS. a case study approach to put in action our tools and methods and test them in real scenarios with actual data sets, while at the same time documenting the whole process and recording our workflows. To work on this thematic approach, a specific task force was formed with some of the partners of APOLLONIS and Daria Greece. We've heard earlier from Maria Spiliotopoulou the Academy's contribution to this task force. And the theme selected is the study of Greece in the 1940s. This is a very dense and turbulent period in Greek history, as in most of Europe actually, due to its significant events. Of course, in Greece, a civil war took place on top of everything else after World War II, which makes it even more challenging. And which archives we're talking about? Well, we approached certain archives and memory institutions with digitized records from the 1940s, shedding light on different historical aspects of these events. Maria Spiliotopoulou earlier gave us a very good idea about these institutions and their content. And ASCII from Stathis' presentation is one of them, with a very important contribution. So these institutions agreed to provide the metadata of their digitized collections for us to assemble and try our techniques for the benefit of users. What I'm going to present here is part only of the work of this task force. It's what we've been doing at Digital Curation Unit and Athena Research Center in this context. It's still work in progress, and of course, it's a team effort. But let us first examine the current user experience regarding remote access to the archival records in question. First of all, the user would have to visit 6 different websites, one of them not working, as you can see. One would have to search using different criteria with information not always retrievable due to structural reasons and semantic ambiguities. In most cases, you cannot search records using time spans, and you cannot often export results for further analysis. On the other hand, the content provided can be challenging in many ways, like being in various formats, different schemas, sometimes using different vocabularies for the same things, or not being consistent documentation-wise, while typos, extensive use of abbreviations and uppercase, or metadata expressed in the archaizing form of modern Greek language are some of the most common problems. So let's see what we do about it. Our aim is twofold. On the one hand, to create, to gather metadata coming from different providers and assemble them in a way that will enable joint indexing based on the following criteria: actors, that is persons and organizations, places, time, subjects, and events. That means that the end user will be able to search in one place records from various providers, combining those basic criteria, and regardless of the field name, this information is originally kept. And on the other hand, equally important for us as an infrastructure is to identify digital curation activities at various stages of the process and to record our workflows and give them back to the community as training material, recommendations, guides, etc. Breaking down our work into distinct tasks, what we should keep in mind is that task numbers in the presentation do not necessarily imply a chronological order. This is not a straightforward process, but rather an iterative one. Sometimes we have to go back and forth between tasks, while others we have to perform them in parallel. but we've already mentioned that we have different metadata schemas from archive to archive, or sometimes from collection to collection. So after a detailed investigation of their structure and contents, we decided to create a common schema based on the Europeana Data Model with some extensions, and map all different archive metadata onto it, enabling this way the joint indexing, which is our ultimate goal. We've already seen some of the challenges of the content that have to do with typos and inconsistencies. We've decided to deal with some of them by cleaning messy metadata up to a point, because we didn't want to drastically change the original content at this stage. I know that it's all Greek to you, or at least to some of you, but I hope you can understand this example that shows how 9 different field values have become 1 after correcting the typos. This is just to point out that during the whole process, multiple file transformations need to be done at various stages, while XML files are programmatically created using the common schema. It can be time consuming, and it is something that we have taken in consideration in our workflows. The cleaned metadata are ingested into a repository through more Aggregator, which is a digital service developed at DCU, and which also enables the joint indexing based on the set of basic criteria we've already mentioned. We will talk about agents, subjects, and events in a while. Here, I just want to point out some places which can be found with different ways across records. For example, Athena, Athene, Athenon. So we explore ways to deal with it by using gazetteers, like, for example, geonames. This is the idea of Athens in geonames, for example. And same with time expressions across records. We've decided to transform programmatically all time expressions into dates in order to be able to search in time spans. While creating common vocabularies in a standardized way for actors, subjects, and events is a desideratum. Just to give an example, you can see here 6 distinct values for the same person, who, apart from his real name, Andreas Gimas, was also known under the alias Vasilis Samariniotis or the alias Samarineos. It's a time of war, and aliases are something to be expected. In collaboration with the Institute of Language and Speech Processing at Athena Research Center, we decided to apply natural language processing techniques to extract additional information contained in free text fields, like the one in the example. From the value in the field title, we were able to extract information for the document type, the date, the topic, the sender and receiver of the document, and armed units mentioned in it. So in a way, we enrich the records with new information that is generated due to our processing. This type of enriched metadata we want to keep in a separate place than the original material. They will be ingested in a knowledge base, and this RDF representation generated from the encoded archival material metadata and the outcomes of our processing will enable the publication in the form of a semantic graph and support interesting complex queries. We cannot stress enough how important identifying and supporting research workflows is for us as an infrastructure. I think I've said it more than once already. So I won't tire you more with it, but I will be happy to elaborate in the discussion if needed. And last but not least, how this is going to reach the audience. We are designing a special section in our portal where users will be able to explore all this content and learn about the tools and methods used and ways to benefit from them in their own research. This is expected to be on air shortly, so stay tuned. And of course, as this is an ongoing theme, we are open to collaborations. That's all for now. This is just a teaser from the website we are designing. I think I've finished even earlier. So
yes, 3 more minutes if you want to elaborate even more. No, just joking. Okay. In case you're done, thank you so much, Maria. And from the Greek landscape of the archival 1940s, we're moving to a more European level. So it's my pleasure to welcome Victor Jan Vos. He's the head of collections and services at NEOD in Amsterdam. He's going to be talking to us about accessing the Dutch records of World War II via the NEOD Institute. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Aggregate, and good afternoon. I will just share my screen. 1 second. There we are. Indeed, I'm Victor Jan Vos. I'm head of collections and services at NEOD, which is the Institute for War, Holocaust and Genocide Studies in the Netherlands. It's quite a prominent institute. It's part of the Royal Netherlands Academy of Science. And I'm going to be talking about how actually we have collected a lot of the records of the World War in the Netherlands and how these records are made available through the NEOD. But first, I would like to say hello in Greek. At least I hope this is hello. And I'm now going to pronounce curated. Since we're talking about Greek, I thought it would be nice to just say hello to you. If you want to understand a little bit about the NEOD and how we are operating ourselves, you need to know, of course, what World War II was about in the Netherlands. And these are the main facts, I think. First of all, the Netherlands was occupied by Germany from May 1940 to 1945, so 5 years. The Netherlands actually had a relatively high number of victims of the World War. 250,000 victims, of which 104,000 were Jewish victims. And those crimes against the people were actually carried out very bureaucratically, which is, of course, very interesting for us now as researchers to collect all those records. But there, behind every name, behind every number that I just point on the screen, there's a story behind it. Also, what is noticeable about, I think, the Netherlands in the World War is that there was quite a considerable amount of collaboration. This number, 100,000 members of the collaborating party with the Germans, is of course just the fact of the members that had a membership card, but there were more people, of course, collaborating, like police officers or people working in the municipalities. And these kinds of stories still entice a lot of research about what happened in the 1940s in the Netherlands. Again, after the Second World War, already 300,000 cases of special justice was carried out. Those files and those records where people were judged because on their collaboration are still being kept. They're not kept at the NEOD, but they're kept at the National Archives, and they're still quite a big source of research. You may know Indonesia, the Netherlands East Indies at that time, also occupied not by Germany, of course, but by Japan. And we at NEOD also collected some records of that period in time. So in the 1945, immediately after the Dutch government decided it was worth collecting all those records, making sure that the information is available. And NEOD was founded immediately after World War II as a research institute, but also mainly as a record collecting institute. The NEOD is the Dutch abbreviation for Netherlands Institute of War Documentation. So on 8 May of 1945, only 3 days after the Netherlands, the government decided to institute the State Institute for War Documentation, then called RIOD. For some reason, it was instituted as a part of the Royal Netherlands Academy in 1999 as NEOD. The difference between state and Netherlands, if you look at the abbreviation. And because of the widening of the scope of the NEOD, we also merged with the Center for Holocaust and Genocide Studies, which is really a research institute and not so much a record-keeping institute in 2010. So that's where this new name comes from, and we do not only research now the Second World War, but also other genocides, like, for instance, the wars in Yugoslavia or even Vietnam, Africa, Rwanda. All these tragic episodes is researched by the NEOT. So this quote, I really like this quote. This is really the origin of the establishment of the NEOT. This is done by a minister in the war cabinet. And he said that it would be very interesting to understand after the Second World War how and why what happened. You need to go to the normal information, the diaries, the letters, speeches that were given. This is very important. And he did a speech on the radio, which is illegal radio, of course, at the time. And a lot of people heard these things and started collecting their records, their diaries, their letters, their words during the occupation. And the most famous person, I think the most famous victim, unfortunately, of the Second World War is, of course, Anne Frank. And she also heard this speech by Minister Bolkestein. And she wrote in her diary, there's a quotation here, how nice would it be if my book, the Annex, would be published as a novel that we would have here. And I still find this very touching if I read this text, because she was so convinced that her story would be so important. And this is really what the NEOT has given as a task, to collect these kinds of information. So this happened in 1945. A lot of records came towards the NEOT, and this is a part of the collection. People sent the documents, sent the letters, sent the folders to us, and they were quite nicely cataloged and collected. And I think the first 20, 30 years of the NEOT was still busy cataloging, identifying, indexing those kinds of records. This has led to a collection. And the collection, this is a picture of what is down here in the building where our deposits are. The collection is about 400 archives about the Netherlands and World War II, including a little bit about Indonesia, of course. This is about 4 kilometers, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is quite a lot if you really understand that each document actually represents a story. We have collected 170,000 images of the Netherlands in World War II. In addition, to understand the events, 75,000 publications in the library, which are available as secondary literature. And here they are, the 1800 war diaries. So Anne Frank's diary is only one of them, those that we collected, but there are 1800, and we are currently making them available transcribed. 13 meters of letters, which you can imagine is quite a few. I think that's about 30,000 letters. And normally the archive is visited by 25 researchers every day, which makes our reading room not that very big, but it's actually the maximum amount of people that can sit here. So it's quite full at the moment. Of course, at this moment, not really, because we have a limited capacity because of COVID-19, but normally 25 researchers come here every day, visiting the collections or looking at the publications in the library. So there are a few things I think you need to take care of when you are making these kinds of collections available. And I will go into detail in each of them that I think are the most prominent, are the most important to take note of. Even if you do this in other countries, which is, first and foremost, I think this has been mentioned a few times, privacy concerns. I think the 4 letters we all love to hate, GDPR, are very, very important in our field of work. This is, by the way, a picture of the reading rooms that we have. There's the library, and it's the rooms where there are computers where people can access the records, they can request the records. But since the laws in the Netherlands and the European laws are very strict, we have to be very careful in opening up the records and the documents for everyone who wants to access them. So only for research or personal reasons the archives can be accessed. which is quite also a consideration if you want to make these things digitally. That's most often not really possible if you want to make it available on Europeana or on other national portals or international portals, because you need to have a specific task into making those things available. Looking back at the numbers that I just said, there were quite a lot of people collaborating with the German occupiers. So you don't want your great-grandfather or your father or your neighbor known as a collaborator, unfortunately, unless you have a specific reason as a researcher or as a family member. This, of course, may change over time, and we are currently in a discussion on how to deal with this kind of information. As I've also noted, indeed, in this slide, most restriction will disappear after 2025. Then we do not have to care anymore for people that might still be living. Still, we have to be careful in privacy concerns, and we are talking with the ministry and with the government, also with colleagues in the field, on how can we deal with privacy concerns after 2025. What has happened is that also a lot of databases and indexes have been created for the NIOD, so that if you are looking for a name or for a street name or whatever, you can easily find the archival record that is available. And this has been done by our colleagues in the 1950s and 1960s. These databases have then, of course, been transferred to digital files. But still, it's very difficult for us to make those databases available in an index for other parties to use. So these are mainly used for internal. You have to come to the study room of the NIOD, and then people will tell you, this is the document you can access, here it is, please study it here, but take care of the privacy concerns. So this is a very important thing and something that is hindering also us in a digital strategy. But for research purposes, it might be very possible. Secondly, and I touched upon this already, this is a website that the NIOD has set up in collaboration with many other collection holding institutes about the Second World War. It's called Oorlogsbronnen in Dutch, or Dutch War Collection in English, where we have collected the documents that were actually can be shared online, can be accessed in a single portal. So this is our main access material for showing and finding records. The documents themselves, actually, what NIOD can provide are very limited because they're archival documents and they are done for privacy purposes. Secondly, what we have done is this website is an award-winning website. It is made by this project team that does the war heritage collections online. It's called Oorlogslevens or War Lives in English. And this is a website where you can type in a name of a person that is available in one of those databases that the NIOD or other institutions have collected. And you can see very easily what has happened with them, whether they have died, for example, in one of the concentration camps, whether they were arrested, whether they were deported, all these kinds of information. The nice thing about this is that it brings all the data of several archives together. And here on the website in the gray things, you can see where these databases are all coming from. And you can then look further for the information on the websites of those institutes. This is a very interesting thing. It works on linked data, and a specific project team tasked by the Dutch government is working on it, improving it, finding databases and indexes of people, bringing them together. It's a really interesting and promising project. Yeah, there we are. Another thing that you need to take note of is preservation of the documents themselves. Most of the documents actually that we have collected are just private documents. They are actually never meant to make available and store for a very long time. So we are digitizing quite a lot, not so much for accessibility or for research, but for preservation. And here you see a diary from the Netherlands East Indies, a diary which is already very difficult to read, or lists, or even this is actually colored paper, which was made on the 30th, which was at that time the national holiday of the Netherlands at the time. So this is someone who put this in his diary. This is not mainly for access, but this is specifically for preservation. And that means that the documents themselves actually cannot be accessed anymore, but the digital documents can. This is, of course, something that the government also is subsidizing us to doing. So, and we do this in collaboration with many other institutes. Finally, my issue, and this is a thing that can entice some discussion, I think, but what you have to be very careful of as a war institute, as a research institute, is morality. In the Netherlands, because of the large amount of collaboration, people were often identified as you are either good or you are wrong. You have been good in the war, you have been wrong in the war. And these words were also used as a identifying stamp on someone's life or someone's family even. And this guy is the founder of the NIOD, is Professor Lou de Jong. And he wrote a large book. This is actually one book in many different volumes, the Netherlands in the Kingdom of the Netherlands in the World War, in which he quite clearly wrote down what happened. And this book was for a long time seen as the definite answer on what happened and whether it was right or whether it was wrong. And he also really showed this as a fact to do so. Now, as the NIOD, we get a lot of information requests about people who were, for instance, where a park was named after, and we have to decide, is this a good thing or is this a bad thing? And that's something that we really don't want to do. We want, as a research institute, we want to give the facts, we want to give research, and we want to tell people, this is where you can find the information, please decide upon your own. And I think as a research institute and as researchers themselves, we have to be very careful of giving judgments to people.
Victoria, one more minute, sorry.
I'm almost done, so thanks. So that is, I think, a point that we have to be very careful about as researchers on specific times, especially if people are still living or people or families are still in power or whatever. We have to be very careful on making sure that you are not the moral authority, but you are the research authority. You give the facts and you decide upon those facts by someone else. So that's my presentation. Thank you very much for this opportunity.
Here I am. Thank you very much, Victor Jan. That has been fascinating and setting. We can really see the connections, and we can see the differences in what you're talking about, and when issues of privacy, morality, as you said, come in, issues of controversial past that staff is raised, collaborators. We've been dealing with those things as well. So the floor goes, of course, now to somebody from the infrastructure that has been working on the 1940s for years now, and Ferle van den Delen. She's a dear colleague. She is now Deputy General Director and Curator at Kazerne Docine in Belgium, and she has been key in the works of ERI, the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure. She will be talking to us about it, about ERI as a route planner for Holocaust research, about experiences, challenges, and plans for the future. So Ferle, the floor is yours now.
Okay, well, thank you so much, Aggregate, and thank you for having me, the last speaker in a row of very interesting presentations. So it's an honor, and let's delve right into the last one so that we can then go into the discussion. So, as Aggregate mentioned, I wanted to introduce the European Holocaust Research Infrastructure. The European Holocaust Research Infrastructure has started in 2010 as a project, a 4-year project, and we have just launched the 1st of September, the 3rd project. So we're at ERI 3 by now, and we're also on our way to becoming a stable infrastructure. And our goal is really to enhance Holocaust research by making available all this information on Holocaust sources that we can. And we've heard all very fascinating presentations on work being carried out to open up Holocaust sources by individual institutions, and also by aggregators like the APOLLONIS project, but here ERI would like to really be the route planner for Holocaust research and towards all these institutions and all these projects as a whole. And by bringing all this information into one portal, the metadata, so not the data, because we could not put all the digital scans into one repository, one server, that would be quite a mission impossible. But we really want to put in the information into one portal, and then in this way also see which new methodologies and cooperations can come out of this. How can we bring Holocaust research to this new level of cooperation? So I've put the link to the ERI project, but there's obviously the portal, and the portal has its own little homepage, and this is where you can see how we work and how the data, the metadata, come into this ERI portal. You can see that we are working on 63 different countries already, that we are working on more than 2,000 archival institutions, and that we have way over 300,000 top level descriptions. So we bring in the top layer of descriptions, also for privacy reasons, because we cannot transnational bring in all the data and all the name lists and all of this, and also for practical reasons, and because we really want to point out to all these different institutions opening up the archives from their own end. So that makes this whole project quite scattered through Europe and beyond. So you see on this map already a little bit of an impression of the institutions that bring in collection descriptions, and it's a cutoff map, so it's not the whole thing yet. So we're sort of transnational, it's fair to say, even though we're all now stuck at home due to COVID-19. But we're still doing this route planning. We're doing this route planning top down, from country reports into individual archival descriptions, into individual entries, collection, fonts, record groups, whatever the institution themselves name it. And all this information is brought together into this portal in order to help people to know how to find where, what. Because knowledge and information is key. We've heard several presentations. We are working with all these institutions, and it's not necessarily the case that a city archive or a national archive in a specific country has Holocaust history experts among their staff. Sometimes researchers visiting the archives can handle the Hebrew and the Yiddish or the German sources that the local archivist has more of a challenge with. So there's this part of how do we encourage information gathering on the sources themselves. There's also the logical locations, where to find what, but there's also the less logical locations. For example, archives in Cincinnati have a collection that deals with sources on all the European Jewish communities during the war that very few researchers are top of mind aware of, because why would you go to, let's say, Cincinnati for this if you're looking for Greek history, Lithuanian history, French history? But also the sources have migrated. There were the attempts to destroy the evidence, there were the perpetrators and the victims who have migrated as well, and the sources have therefore also relocated to logical and less logical locations. And I'll give you a quick example about this in just a minute. There's also, because of the vast geographical area we're talking about that was affected directly by the Nazi rule and the Holocaust, we're talking about various languages and scripts. And when I say various, it's really multiple. I still would dream of filling a vacancy for somebody who speaks 40+ languages to kind of deal with all the sources and the languages of descriptions of the sources. So it's not only the sources themselves in all the various languages and scripts, but equally all the descriptions, the metadata, also come in Cyrillic, Latin, Greek, Hebrew, you name it. So needless to say, there's a need for standardization to make all this able to speak to each other, to enhance the interoperability of all these information. And so there's also the fact that there is both digital and analog, and sometimes institutions have digital descriptions to analog material. Sometimes institutions digitize everything but are lagging behind on the metadata and the descriptions for the sources. So there's a lot of variety in the different situations, and digital, unfortunately, does not equal standardized. So that doesn't mean that everything is in the same structure or format, as we've seen also in the APOLLONIS talk, where we saw all the different ways of writing one word. So controlled vocabularies can help there, but also even if there's standardized metadata schema, the interpretation often varies from the archivist who fills it out, and there's different way of putting in, as already shown as well, data sets and so on and so forth. And unique identifiers are sometimes only unique for a certain time. They're not persistent. So there's a lot of things that are required in order to make everything really talk to each other and be and make it possible to interconnect it. So, and then there's the whole volume of all these sources, which is so enormous that there's not one person who can oversee all this. So you need to cooperate, and you need to talk with various people, various institutions. And Holocaust sources are also amongst those sources that have been copied the most of any other topic. I cannot think of another topic in history where the sources have been copied that many times and have ended up in these multiple locations to enhance research. So connecting original and copies and trying to help researchers figure out what is the best way to kind of consult your research is quite a challenge. Do you go to one place? Do you go to multiple places? And as we also already saw during the previous presentation, the culture and the history of who describes and opens up these sources is also important. We heard about the Greek Civil War. Victor Jan started as well immediately by explaining the Dutch World War II history. And you see also the post-war history reflected in the way the sources have been described and preserved. So, for example, to give you the less logical location example I promised to you, I do not think that many French researchers have searched for confiscation of property sources from Paris in the Zich in Warsaw. These sources are nicely preserved by a Polish archive who nicely describes them in Polish, but before ERI came along and connected all of this to the same creators, I doubted that many people would have found these sources when they were working on this topic. Within ERI, we also bring in parallel descriptions so that multiple languages, as you can see in this case, English and Ukrainian, can be read simultaneously so that people can switch from one to the next, because the sources may be in German and the German researcher may be held by the Ukrainian or he may be held by the English. So we're trying to merge all of this together so that people can really find their way in there, and also you can switch the language of the portal itself. And in that way, we are also trying to be really your route planner to where the digital material is available. In case of this Rovno archive, nicely described in Cyrillic, there is an English language description that provides you with the information on the sources, but there's also a digital project, again, nicely in Cyrillic characters, that gives you the information on and leads you to the digital scans. Now, I do not read the Cyrillic characters, but I can find my way with the English description and the numbers there into this digitization project, and can find my way in that way all the way to a German language document that I can then read and understand. So there's really, you can be quite lost in translation, and what we're trying to do is enhance this to make sure that Holocaust research is supported as much as possible. It also means that we bring in information from in various ways. We author collection descriptions ourselves in English when needed. If they do not exist, then we help institutions writing them. But we also, the ones who can publish encoded archival descriptions and have a harvester and where we can harvest with OAI PMH, that is possible. That's like a straightforward route into the portal. But also those institutions who are working digital but do not create valid encoded archival descriptions, we have a tool to convert that into it, so the EAD conversion tool. But then it's still not published. So we also made a tool for them to help them publish those data so that they can come into this portal. And with all these ways, we have various routes that lead to the ERI portal. And then again, out of the ERI portal. And we're trying to interconnect all these data as much as possible, because we also learned that the people, archivists and researchers, are both interested in this. What we learned along the road, and that's for me since 2011, is that that's all nice and well, all this digital, but at the end of the day, you always need a human. There's always the cleaning up to do, already mentioned as well, the standardizing of and computers can help, but there's always this interconnectedness that you need. What we also learned is that the archivists and the institutions curating and describing the sources, their voice needs to be heard in these type of projects. You really need to engage with them, because at the end of the day, the researchers who do not necessarily need to know all the stuff that I put on the first part of this slide, if they will find most information in there, it's because these archivists in all these various institutions or the data managers make it happen. And that's the key to the whole success. So, because it's not like a library where you have the author and a quite fixed set of data that you bring in. It's much more complicated to bring archives into a standardized environment. This already is a just visual show up of how diverse it gets. It's finding aids, but they're very different already from the look and feel. So they are definitely also different when you have to bring them in and you have to kind of find the right way to merge all the information. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue merging the data and work on our route planner to reveal all these interconnections, to make it the most logical way forward for historians and other disciplines to find their way through Holocaust sources. We're continuing top down, but also bottom up. Like all the examples that we heard today are very meaningful national or team-centered nodes who are where we can learn both from our level and learn from each other and exchange and see how we can bring it all together. But I also want to stress, as much as I appreciate this setting right now, digital does never replace the analog. You always will have the analog sources, the analog originals, and also working on the digital infrastructure will require in-person meetings, because the paradox of virtual teams is that you really need in-person contact to really make it work. So there is just a limit into what can all be done digitally. So digital does not exclude analog. And it's we will continue to cope with the heterogeneity of all the sources and make sure that whatever goes into our system also can go out. So to kind of really make sure that everything will be, that it can be shared and that it's a multiple way street. And so I'm very, very eager to continue working on this project. I also heard a lot of ideas to cooperate with other projects during these presentations. So thank you so much. And let's delve right into the discussion part. So thank you for listening and for this event this afternoon.
Thank you so much. This has been great. All the updates of ERI, I was really eager to hear about it all, and indeed we only had 5 presentations, but you can really see some commonalities or some common issues arising. So thanks for the questions that you've been sending. I have 3 so far. The first question was directed to Stathis Pavlopoulos, and it is a question I had in mind too. It's not really a question, it is expressed as one, but it's a very interesting topic of discussion. So I'm reading it out loud for the attendees. The question is, you have highlighted the connection between epidemics and communist contagion in the case of Macronisos. So do you think that DH projects, digital humanities projects, like the ones we discussed today, can contribute to a critical thinking of contemporary issues like social exclusion and policing, nationalism, racism, which are fueled even more by the pandemic? The refugees and immigrants of Moria, this is the refugee camp that has been burning since yesterday, is it, on Lesbos Island in eastern Greece, are a striking example. Which could be the role of a digital public history of the 1940s in this aspect? So is there a role to play of the digital in whatever has to do with this sensitive issue? So this is a question to Stathis Pavlopoulos, but I'm sure that perhaps, you know, Maria Spiliotopoulou or others may have views on that, because Maria also mentioned fake news during her talk. Stathis or Maria?
Probably Maria Spiliotopoulou would like to answer first, because she was first in the presentation.
As you wish. I envied Victor Jan the way he spoke about collaboration, the way he spoke about Indonesia, because this shows us how you can work on your national past and accept it. And also it was very important what he said about morality and how archives, digital or not, should be careful of not giving any judgment. So in this way, such a digital portal as we are developing, and especially when we include the documents of ASCII and the documents of the Directorate of the Hellenic Army, can help us to understand and accept the way things evolve, the way things are not black or white, and first of all, how we should fight racism and Nazism and fascism. And this is what ERI also shows us. This is what the Dutch archives enable us to do. That was, thank you.
Thanks, Maria. Stathis? Or in fact, Victor Jan or Fairley. I guess Maria is on a different angle here, but please feel.
Okay, I would just add that the digital humanities projects, from my point of view, are the suitable digital tool to raise such subjects, such dramatic subjects. And I think as institutions, we have to take part to this discussion. Sometimes we tend as historians, as scholars, as academics to give like an elitistic perspective to things. But I think the crucial thing is to to provide to create an environment of democratic discussion and dialogue that fight the stereotypes, that is not that does not come to easy conclusions and anachronisms. So I believe, yes, the digital humanities have such abilities. We can do more attractive, more interesting the historical thinking, the historical writing, and the presentation of sources.
Anybody else wants to step in? Victor Jan and Ferle. So Victor Jan unmuted first, so he goes first.
I think I completely agree with Ferle when she said that a human intervention and human interpretation of data is always necessary. This might mean either a preparation of the data before you handle your digital humanities tools, or even after, when you have to interpret your findings. And I think that should stay very important, because the data that we are actually researching is never intended for the research tools that we actually currently have in our use. So it should be very clear that you always need to know, what are you talking about, what is the data, and what kind of judgment or what kind of outcomes you want to achieve from those. That's as digital humanitarian, I think that is a very important realization that you need to take in.
Ferle?
Yeah, so it's quite clear humans can deal with messy data and computers can't, right? So even if somebody indicated in a time frame on the topic we are discussing that it is 1842, we will all know, like, oh man, he made a typo. That must have been 1942 that he or she wanted to say. So that's one thing. And we saw the cleanup, and who likes cleaning, you know, actions that that Maria told us about. But at the same time, I also want to warn for the morality thing. There is no such thing as full objectivity. And the ERI project is one of these places where you can see that coming to the fore. When we think within our own frame of interpretation that the keywords that we use are the objective, the neutral ones, merging all the data from all these different countries has learned me more than anything else in the world how subjective it actually still is, even though we think it's totally neutral. The Jewish victims that we've been looking for in former communist countries or in the former Soviet Union are indicated not as Jews, but as peaceful Soviet citizens. So it's a different type of indication and keyword used, which was back then probably considered neutral and appropriate. What is considered an act of resistance for one person or from our personal perspective today can have been indicated as a terrorist act in another regime and by another framework that you're looking at the sources. Yes, by all means, enhance the dialogue, enhance the discussion. But for example, what we tried within ERI is we want to make sure that people are more aware of that by merging it all together so that it becomes more clear, that you actually become more aware of your own framework and what you think is possibly neutral or objective. But we are not changing, for example, the descriptions that the cooperating institutions are bringing to us. And so when you make them those parallel descriptions of same sources, then it comes to the fore much more. So there's a lot of possibility to also use these type of tools to enhance dialogue, to enhance a kind of discussion, a kind of putting yourself and your own framework into question and see how you deal with that. So I think it's also a possibility to enhance discussion and to enhance reflection.
Thank you. Well, yes, I agree pretty much with all of you. And I mean, if I may, there has been so much discussion lately over the decolonization of archives, democratization of archives. What does this really entail? Other than, you know, making something accessible, does it really entail messing up or reinterpreting metadata? in such a way that you sort of alter the characters of archives altogether? And would that be acceptable? I mean, it's a long discussion. Let me move on to the next question, which comes from Kostis Dallas. May I note here that Kostis Dallas is part of our team at the Digital Curation Unit at Athena Research Center, other than his professorship in Canada, in Toronto, but also he has been a member of the Europeana Research Advisory Board since its very beginning in 2015. So he has a question for Maria. He basically says that, Maria, you mentioned the possibilities for semantic search afforded by the way resources are documented. Could you please elaborate or give an example, illustrations that illustrates the kind of research questions that could be served by such a capability? So the floor is on to Maria.
Yes, thanks, Kostis, for this very interesting question. Well, as I've mentioned, we have produced annotations through our processing techniques like NLP, and we will incorporate the metadata, the enriched metadata into the graph. These are information on actors, persons, organizations, places. So the modeling is there to answer questions, to pose questions, queries like which person was a member of which organization from what and in what period. Questions like this are very interesting for researchers, and through the RDF graph, we could pose questions like this that now we cannot answer with the data as it is. I don't want to be more technical, but if Kostis wants to hear more about the technicalities of the graph, I should bring him to Vicky Dritsu, our colleague that has been the person modeling the graph along with Carmen Vurvahaki.
Any other comments on that? Possibly not. I don't know if Maria Spliotopoulou, but possibly not. Not any comments on that. Okay, whenever we come to the more technical, none of us really wants to go into it as much. So it's good for us that the last question we have brings us more or less back to the previous topic, and it is a question addressed to all of you. So then the question goes like this. Much documentation work focuses on either provenential context of archival items or in the realia indexed or represented in the records, people, locations, events, and themes, or more generally named entities belonging to a realist approach to history as factual inquiry. But would this level of documentation be adequate to also allow us to pose meaningful questions related to the discursive, multivocal, and constructed aspects of historical memory? To allow us, for instance, to make sense of often opposing narratives connected with different motivations, prejudices, practices of memory and forgetting. In other words, to what extent our current infrastructure affordances, both, I guess, on a both national and European level, documentation methods and metadata standards, to what extent are they adequate for interpretive historical research? Or are they just tools and interpretation comes later or in different ways? Do our infrastructures offer different means of interpretation or not? Yes, Verly?
Well, I think I partly already addressed that in my former reaction, in that sense that the real research result, as in a scientific article or anything else, is not necessarily part of the metadata, but the variety and interpretations on describing the sources can come to the fore by merging them all into into one portal. It also is a case where the existence of sources that one may have wanted to forget or one may have wanted to destroy can find their way to a broad audience if they are preserved and opened up via another institution, not necessarily in the same country or in the same continent. So those are ways that address those things via the sheer existence of the portal. And we're also looking in the ERI project, but we haven't yet put it much into practice, into enhancing researchers more to allow for them to connect their published research and their research results, the links to that as well, the metadata leading to the sources they consulted to publish their research, that we also allow them to connect the results of this research that we led them to with those metadata, that we kind of make that also, again, a multiple way discussion, because it can be extremely interesting as well for the archivists to have all this information ready at hand to enhance knowledge from their end, and to really have that as an as wide community as possible, with as less or as little limitations to block that dialogue as possible.
Mm-hmm. Anyone else would like to comment on that? Do you all believe that?
Sorry. I would like to say that the interpretation is what a historian or a researcher or a member of the wider public is going to do. What we do is to offer an infrastructure allowing the user to search the archives. But what we also do is that we have selected the archives. We have not based our infrastructure, for example, only on one of the sites fighting during the Civil War. We have not based our infrastructure only, we could not have based our infrastructure on the archives of a single Greek political party. So if the party of the left or the party of the right. So if you provide an infrastructure that covers a wide spectrum and is representative of the period, then the user can proceed by himself or herself to interpret things. Of course, even in that way, if the user is a revisionist, will use the sources in this way. This you cannot avoid.
Mm-hmm. Thanks. Well, I was, yes, please, Tafi.
I would say that all this infrastructure and all the digital repositories and digital humanities projects do not substitute the work of a historian and a researcher, and also they do not substitute the interpretations of the broader public. What they do is offering resources and tools and some general guidelines for a process of understanding. But of course, the questions, the perspectives, and all the history interpretation is a matter of the author of the reader. So I would say that we have to keep in mind in mind this general statement, and also we have to think that all these tools are here to all the data, all the resources are not objective collections. I myself do not believe in historical objectivity. I believe in the declared purposes and clear objectives.
Yes, Maria, please.
Yes, I would just like to add that digital infrastructures are kind of mediators between archives and the public, or even this is a researcher or the broader public. And I agree with Maria Spidiotopoulou on the thing that what is there and what is not there is also important, and it's part of a selection, and it's also part of a type of interfering when you give access to certain records. So it is something that we have to keep in mind, and of course I would see that I think that there is also an ethical part of the infrastructures to have to keep in mind, and it's not that technology is always neutral as well. People are behind infrastructures, and you have to you have to choose, and you have to make choices, and this is something that we need to keep in mind.
Yes, this goes back to what Ferle was talking about. Even metadata schemas or thesauri used are political decisions at the end of the day. Or the way you design your digital museum, for example, Stathis, again, or the way you present anything that needs presenting, again, especially when the object presented is a sensitive one, then this goes back again to what Stathis was talking about. So yes, I do believe, and I do agree with Maria that infrastructures are in fact mediators. I don't know if the audience has any more comments in the Q&A, or not that I see, or if you guys have any other things to add. If not, I will. No? Anything more to add? No? Then it's up to me to thank you all on behalf of Europeana Research, and thank you, Alba and Tamara, for all the support in organizing this. Also on behalf of APOLLONIS, thank you, Maria and Daria Greece, Maria and Maria. Thank you to our non-Greek speakers, Victor, Jan and Ferle. Of course, Stathis from ASCII, a collaborative partner to APOLLONIS. We will be in touch. We will be in touch with all of you guys soon, once we have decided how to expose and promote the content that we have from today. Have a good rest of the day, and it was really nice seeing you, even from afar.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Nice seeing you. Bye.
Nice seeing you. Thank you so much.
Bye-bye.